From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. You can catch us on Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul. This campaign season has been unlike anything the 21st century has ever seen before. By the end of this campaign season, there are two different directions our country may go. Republican and former President Donald Trump will be voted back into the Oval Office, or Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris will become the first Black, South, and Asian woman to become America's Commander-in-Chief. The current president, Joe Biden, after a debate performance that concerned many, decided to drop out of the race. Former President Donald Trump cleared the field and became the Republican nominee. During his campaign season, he faced multiple assassination attempts. And then a woman, who many felt was in the background as vice president, stepped to the forefront and launched a campaign. It raised $1 billion, the most raised in American history, Kamala Harris. Americans have been glued to their screens. Here's a look back on how we got here from the vast amounts of interviews and news reports from this campaign season.
The president, in a tweet, just announcing that he is offering his full support and endorsement for Kamala Harris to be the nominee of the party.
Tonight, the high-stakes showdown here in Philadelphia between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Their first face-to-face meeting in this presidential election.
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals.
Ask Donald Trump what his plan is for Black America. Ask him. I'll tell you what it is. Look at Project 2025. Project 2025 tells you the plan includes making police departments have stop and frisk policies. My plan that is about building up home ownership in the Black community. We can do that.
Welcome back to All the Smoke. But what do you feel or what do you think when you hear people kind of questioning just the fabric of who you are?
I'm really clear about who I am, and if anybody else is not, they need to go through their own level of therapy. That's not my issue.
Their issues, right?
My mother was very clear. She was raising two Black girls to be two proud Black women.
And when President Donald Trump came to the church, he did what no Republican has ever done since I was born. So if you travel around this community and you ask people, did you know that President Trump actually came to a church in your community? You showed them that round table in the RNC speech, they're gonna be encouraged. And they're gonna say, wow, at least he came.
Is there anything you think for you or your friends that might make you think about voting for Donald Trump?
Donald Trump, to be truthful, he's not a bad guy because he speaks up what's on his mind. So you know exactly where he's coming from. The economy was not bad when Donald Trump was president.
You said you have 7 relatives who are going to vote for Trump? Why?
Yes. Again, they're young, African American, and they believe that Trump gave them money during the pandemic.
New CBS News polling finds a 21-point gender gap in this presidential race. That is the largest we have seen all year. Vice President Harris leads with women by 12 points. Former President Trump leads with men by 9 points.
There is a gender gap. There are African American men who aren't really comfortable with a woman as president.
millions of Americans are still undecided, and the race decision hangs in the ballots. On this dialogue, we hold space with leading political experts and commentators, local reporter perspectives, and the first Black woman to serve as a United States Senator. As the election comes to a close, we wonder, what will this mean for Black America? Lauren Victoria Burke joins the conversation now. She's a former CNN and MSNBC contributor. Currently, she's a consultant, independent journalist, and strategic communicator. Lauren Victoria Burke, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
As a country right now, we are so divided. Former President Donald Trump has his base of support. Harris has her base of support. Is there any historical precedence of a campaign season like this?
You know what? Probably not. It's hard to tell because, of course, we weren't alive in the late 1800s or right after the Civil War, stuff like that. It was a very divided nation after the Civil War, during the Civil War period. So, you never know. It's hard to tell, other than, of course, to read the old news clips. But clearly there is something going on here. We do have a change because one of our major political parties has decided to really abandon what I would call, the traditional way of doing things, which is you focus on policy, you put your policy ideas out there, and you let the electorate decide whether or not, you're the choice. And this version of the Republican Party, what I think is, generally called the MAGA Republican Party, the MAGA version of the Republican Party, is not much interested in any policy discussion. So the level of division and the attempts by them to, I think, be even more divisive, particularly as it pertains to policy around immigration, I think is what's driving a lot of division.
Mm-hmm. We're closing in on this election here. Can you talk about the ground games of both campaigns?
So apparently the Trump campaign has somewhat outsourced their ground game. That sounded to me as if they've got some hodgepodge of groups that they're probably paying or individuals that they're probably paying to knock doors. The Democrats sort of institutionally have a more organized situation because labor does a lot of their door knocking and labor really has their act together. So a lot of times what you'll see if you're sitting in a swing state, particularly now, is SEIU or somebody from labor knocking on the door. And of course, you have other organizations that are out there focused on specific groups, whether they be Black voters or women or whatever, that knock doors. Grassroots organizations that knock doors. Today, it was announced that Vice President Harris has raised $1 billion. So it's an incredible thing to think about when you think that, when you know the fact that her campaign started late. So she's got $1 billion to be able to have people knocking doors and having the ground game really specific. And of course, that's happening in swing states of Wisconsin and Michigan, Arizona, and Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Former President Trump is running his 2016 playbook as of saying roundly false statements, and he hasn't lost any support. He's gained support amongst Black and Latino men. Why is this kind of commentary resonating with folks and winning over voters?
You know what? I think that certainly it's true that there's a certain percentage of the electorate on the Democratic side and the Republican side that will vote for their party no matter what, almost really no matter what. Even when you have a situation where one of the candidates, I think anybody from any objective reasoning would state, is playing with fire, playing with fascism, openly lying, vilifying immigrants in a way that we have not seen in a really long time. Since probably the turn at right about the 1900s, we may have seen a little of that, but certainly not on this type of level where you're lying, you're saying you're trying to brand immigrants with violence, with murder, with all sorts of things, and you're just saying it and it's being broadcast. It's hard to tell what part of Donald Trump is the part that his supporters are selecting. But certainly if somebody shows up in the way that he has shown up and talks about the things that he platforms on a daily basis, in some of the most racist and vile and shameful ways and talks like that, and you're still supporting that, that's got to call into question what exactly is in the minds of his supporters. There's all this sensitivity about, well, his supporters don't like to be called racist and they don't like to be called this and they don't like to be called that. Yeah, that's problematic. That's problematic now that we are in year 10 of Donald Trump, and his first year started with the big lie about our first Black president not being from the United States. That was his entrance into politics. And then, making an announcement into the 2016 campaign that Mexican immigrants were rapists and murderers. You're saying this out loud in public. This is being broadcast, and your supporters are still supporting you. At some point, someone has to come to the conclusion, I think, from a logical standpoint, that if you're voting for that, this is what you support.
Mm. The Harris campaign has hired at least 60 attorneys, Mark Elias being one of them, to combat election challenges by the Trump campaign. Is this democracy ready for all of these petitions? Will voters believe in the final verdict? What do you think the Supreme Court will do in this instance?
Oh, wow. Hopefully the Supreme Court won't be involved in it, because certainly at a 6-3 right-leaning court that was primarily built, the majority was built by former President Trump, I think they're likely, given some of their other rulings that we've seen, they're likely to side with him. This former president, Donald Trump, is set on lying. It's clear that he's setting the table already for the idea that if he doesn't win, there was some sort of fraud if he's not the winner. He seems to have it in his mind that when you get beat by 2.8 million votes by Hillary Clinton and then 7 million votes by Joe Biden, that somehow there's some sort of fraud going on because he's losing. He's losing because the Republican Party has been losing now for 20 years with regard to the popular vote. He's losing because the Republican Party refuses to change a few things to have a bigger tent, to perhaps have some other groups interested in their policy, which they don't seem to be interested in policy too much at all. And to me, is setting the table for violence again. And as somebody who, my boyfriend is a U.S. Capitol Police officer for over 2 decades and was there on Jan 6, 2021. And this sounds like the same ramp up that we heard back in January from former President Trump. And I just think that his game of lying is working, unfortunately, in this media environment where we have a media that for some reason, at least the mainstream part of our media, is very afraid to fact check and afraid to challenge outright obvious lying. Okay. And there's been a lot of outright obvious lying about the election and about this entire, moment where we have right now, you can see him ramping up again, Donald Trump ramping up again this question. So obviously Mark Elias, who used to have a law firm that was the law firm for the Democratic National Committee, and now he broke off to the Elias firm. He still is really the law firm of the Democrats. They will have to do some serious work, and there's going to be some serious legal battles. There's no doubt about it.
What do you think about the disinformation with the mass media right now in this election cycle?
Yeah, I think that the media is largely failing us, specifically the New York Times. Certainly, we saw a massive fail with CBS declaring that we're not doing any fact checking for a vice presidential debate. Why a news organization, why any news organization would agree to that, I have absolutely no idea. So you saw that Margaret Brennan attempted to fact check J.D. Vance in the vice presidential debate. J.D. Vance had a prepared answer and response for that, which was to push back hard, in which case Margaret Brennan never tried to fact check again. That is a massive media fail. We do not live in a world where you can allow people to lie like this and just say nothing. When you look at the wheel of the way the media works and the way everybody gets paid, is you need spectacle, you need excitement. This machine has to get fed. The ads have to get paid for, and the way that happens is audience, and how you build audience is spectacle. Donald Trump is, by the way, very good at knowing that and understanding that and creating the spectacle. But the media needs to be good at figuring out that that is a killer for their business model on so many fronts. If you can get somebody on YouTube that can create a spectacle, they can create an audience. If they create an audience, then they can beat mainstream media, which is slowly happening.
Young people were a major voting bloc for the Democrats heading into the general election win for President Biden in 2020 and victories in the midterms in 2022. How important will young people be in the 2024 general election?
Well, in a close election in a swing state, consequential, and there's a lot of data that's indicating that younger people, there was a blip in registration after Vice President Harris enters as the nominee or the expected nominee at that time of the Democratic Party. So when you're talking about these places where, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, where you could have a situation where 20 or 30,000 votes or 10,000 votes, or maybe less than that. Georgia would be another one. Younger voters, any block that's made some major move in the last 2 months in terms of registration has to be kept an eye on. But, the stats do tell us that young people are sort of a little bit fickle at the voting booth. I have a feeling they're not going to be fickle this time because this is one of these historic moments, historic elections with a historic character in it at a consequential moment in U.S. history. At the same time, I think we can't forget that older voters are often the ones that really show up. And when I mean older, I really mean older, like, over 60, and they are more reliable to show up and they pay more attention. But back to your point, your question, certainly, a block of younger voters, not even that big of a block in a swing state, is huge. It could mean the entire election because of the electoral college system.
What else would you say about this campaign season? I mean, this is a campaign season that no one has ever seen before in the 21st century.
It's what you think it is. I mean, you're seeing a crazy situation. It's hard, I think, for younger people to imagine what our politics was like before Donald Trump. And I can assure you that our politics were not crazy like this. I mean, the two parties did actually talk to each other in a civil way. Not every single moment was a game of lying and politics. It just wasn't like that prior to about, I would say, I actually think the thing that kicked it off was the election of President Barack Obama. Really, before him, things were fairly normal. And now it is off the rails. It is off the rails. You're getting people who are coming on television and deliberately lying to get information platformed. That's not true. Disinfo and misinfo, to me, is the issue of our times. And fighting it is extremely difficult. And until somebody gets a playbook for that, it's going to be difficult. And our major media companies are failing because they're not protecting the truth like they should be before they put something or someone on the air. And in fact, in some cases, I think they're putting people on the air that they know are going to lie to make money and increase traffic and viewership. So, I mean, this is like the thing. And I think for younger people, it's hard to imagine that it was different from this, but it actually was different from this. It was a lot different and not that long ago. But, that's it. Let your intuition be your guide with what you're saying. See, when you think it's crazy, you're right. It's in fact crazy.
Lauren Victoria Burke, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me. We appreciate it.
That was Lauren Victoria Burke. She's a former CNN and MSNBC contributor. Currently, she's a consultant, independent journalist, and strategic communicator. Next, we'll be hearing from Illinois Public Media's political reporter David Pierce, as he's been reporting on the 2024 election cycle. David, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. This is amazing. So I'm glad that, you could feature me.
So Illinois is not exactly a battleground state. According to the latest polling, Harris is up 18 points in the state, which is about the margin Biden won here in 2020. What are you seeing as you're talking to voters?
So from what I've noticed is that people care about abortion rights. And the thing about it is that if you kind of take notice about what Illinois has to offer, they have that access. So abortion rights has been something that people care about the most. So I would say that's a big factor.
The Trump campaign has been marred by allegations of sexual assault and fraud. Just as recently as last week, former President Trump is out on bond after he was convicted of 34 accounts of fraud in New York earlier this year, and now he's awaiting sentencing. But despite this, the race in the battleground states are tied. How are voters processing this information? Where does this race even stand today?
Well, from what I've been told, people like Trump. They like what he stands for. They like, just his transparency on what he wants to do. People are focused more so on what they believe he can offer based on what they saw in the last term that he had. So people are more focused on what has been their experience with him rather than what's been his own personal, obstacles.
And traditionally, Democrats get 80 to 90% of the Black male vote. However, current polls indicate that there may be slippage from Obama's numbers. Has Harris's latest campaign messaging around housing and economy swayed voters towards her?
So with her latest messaging, what I will say is that until Kamala Harris went on this recent media run with the different podcasts that she's been on, like All the Smoke and Shade Room and the Breakfast Club, I would say in the midst of that, that's where the conversation of the Black vote and the Black male vote has become more of a conversation. I can't say if her messaging has quite been on point, because it wasn't until all of these different appearances she's had that now this plan of Black entrepreneurship and this and possibly legalizing marijuana federally, I can't say that her appearances have boosted the potential support that she's gotten. But it's great that she now has a plan formulated in the midst of her making these appearances. There was an exit poll that Biden got 79% of that support, right? Kamala Harris got 85%. So this is from the ABC News and Ipsos survey.
In a recent Voice of the Voters episode, you spoke with Black men in Champaign and Urbana. What are some of the things that you're hearing?
One gentleman that I spoke with, he was at the train station on his way to Chicago, and he had his wife and he had his 10-month-old son. And I asked him if he was willing to vote, and he was like, no, I haven't voted since 2008. And that's the first time Barack Obama had ran. And I said, well, why don't you want to vote? He said, well, I don't believe in that type of stuff because they don't do anything for us. They don't do anything for the lower class. So what I'm hearing is that this gentleman feels alienated by the presidential candidates and whoever may become president, who has become president. He feels alienated by them, that they don't show that type of support for those that are in that socioeconomic class. So Black men don't feel seen, essentially. And this gentleman was 38. There was another gentleman downstairs in the terminal. I spoke with him, and he's 57. That is not too far off from the civil rights movement. And he spoke about that. And he was saying that Black men not wanting to vote because they don't want to vote is not a good enough excuse.
Let's listen to a clip from this particular Voice of the Voter series episode.
It's important for Black people to go out and vote for the simple fact that Black people have to realize and understand that people have lived and died so that they can have the right to vote. They have suffered and been beaten so people can have the right to vote. And for you to sit back and say, well, my vote don't count, that's not good enough.
I will say that, it's a good reminder as to why you should at least leave home or cast a mail-in vote of some sort, but at least do it, because this is something that hasn't always been allowed to us.
David Pierce, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Yes. Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you for having me.
And a reminder, if you need information about the local, regional, and national candidates, check out ipmnewsroom.org and check out our Your Vote, Your Voice section. You can fill out a sample ballot before you go to the polls on November 5th. Coming up next, we'll be hearing from the first Black woman U.S. Senator in America and the state of Illinois, Senator Carol Moseley Braun. She's currently the chair of the United States African Development Foundation's Board of Directors. Stay with us on Dialogue after this short break. From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. You can catch us on Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul. Senator Carol Moseley Braun is the first Black woman U.S. Senator in America and the state of Illinois. She joins our dialogue today in the theme of Black women in politics. She's currently the chair of the United States African Development Foundation's Board of Directors. Here's a clip of Senator Carol Moseley Braun when she first entered political history.
A year ago, she was the Illinois Recorder of Deeds, and that job is the definition of political obscurity. But today, Carol Moseley Braun has entered political history. She's the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Senate.
Understand, my first obligation is to fill my job description, which is to be the senator from Illinois, and I'm going to work hard to be a good senator, the best senator this state has ever had for all the people of Illinois, and that's my first responsibility.
Senator Carol Moseley Braun, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
My pleasure.
We are living in an era in which there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation targeted towards both Democrats and Republicans. And you've worked under both Democratic and Republican administrations. Is it possible to get back to an era of bipartisanship?
I think we have to. And yes, not only is it possible, it's necessary. We have a responsibility, I think, to govern, and you can't govern being at each other's throat all the time, and to be in a situation where nobody trusts the word of anybody else. I mean, that's kind of the oil that makes the process work, is the fact that you can talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you, and have reach common ground, reach consensus. That's critical to making democracy work.
The senior advisor to the Harris campaign, David Plouffe, has said that the race is currently a toss-up, and it anticipates that Harris or Trump can win in the 7 battleground states by 1 percentage point. This is a pretty close race. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, they tend to be, any election is close until you get the last vote counted. The fact of the matter is that all the polling notwithstanding, it really is a matter of how the votes are and what counts you get from that.
VP Kamala Harris has proposed a $25,000 down payment assistance program for first-time homebuyers, and this is a part of her economic agenda and what she would call an opportunity economy. Senator Carol Moseley Braun, you have also worked in housing policy for marginalized communities in Chicago. Do you think that this could be effective?
I do. And I frankly applaud her economic agenda. I applaud her agenda, period, because I think she's going to do a good job as president should she win the election. You know, we can't assume anything. You know, that old expression about assuming makes an ass out of you and me. So So we're not going to assume that she's going to win, but just hope that she will and pray that she will. And I think her platform shows how eminently qualified she is for the job.
Women could not wear pants on the Senate floor until 1993, and now we're on the verge of potentially electing the first woman president. Considering your journey in American political life, what are you feeling about this moment?
I am just delighted. I'm overwhelmed and very happy that Kamala has made it through the process this far to become the Democratic nominee. I think she can win based on what I'm picking up out here in the streets. People are enthusiastic about electing her, and I think she'll do a good job. She's eminently qualified for the job, and she can do the job. And I think that if we just kind of hunker down and gird our teeth, gird our loins, if you will, and clench our teeth and just keep doing the right thing and get the vote out. If we can get the votes out for her, she can be president.
Can we talk about how far women have come? I mean, do you believe women have come far from discrimination or how they've been viewed in political life?
Well, women have not been in political life except in my lifetime. I mean, it's strange as it may sound. Women were not considered to do anything outside of the home. And frankly, you know, there was a film I saw, frankly, not that long ago about a woman who was raped, and frankly, when that happened, her husband had to come and try to defend her, And happily, he believed her because he was able to do that. She was considered to be his property, and he made it real clear that he was not going to have his property manhandled like it was.
How did you overcome that barrier in your race as the first Black woman elected senator?
One foot in front of the other, you just kind of keep going. You just have to do your job. My mother said, do the best job you can where you're planted. And whatever that circumstance is, you do what you can to change it, but you don't get beyond yourself. Just do the best you can where you're planted. And I think that as we do that, that's what I've always done. I've done the best job I can. I hope I've made a positive contribution to my community and to the people I care about. And that's really what it comes down to. If you just do the best job you can, and you can make a difference.
Was there a moment in your journey that affected you the most?
There were a lot of them, actually, unfortunately. I mean, there were times when I was treated so badly. It was like, why would you put up with being treated like this, Uh, but I kind of decided I wasn't going to be deterred. I was just going to keep going and just keep doing what I thought was the right thing to do, and just not let people put me off my game, if you will, and just keep stepping and doing the best I could. And that's made the difference. And that's how I got to be this old.
You were the first African-American woman elected to serve in the U.S. Senate, and you know a lot about the firsts. If Vice President Kamala Harris were to win the election, what advice would you give her about navigating her first term as president?
I would not presume to give her advice about anything. She's really been more successful than I ever was. She's managed to overcome all the barriers and really get on her side the people who might otherwise have been a real problem for her. But and because of that, I think she has the skills to navigate what is essentially a very contentious environment, an environment in which people are setting out to people are not necessarily trying to help you succeed, but really will do everything they can to put their foot out so you trip up and do something wrong. She's so far been really good at navigating all of that environment, and I applaud her for it.
Last year in 2023, you were appointed by President Joe Biden to serve as a member and chair of the board of directors for the United States African Development Foundation. This marks 45 years of public service. What keeps you motivated to stay in political life?
Well, I got 2 grandbabies, and they, in the first instance, I was going to just kind of leave public life, and then it occurred to me that I had a responsibility to keep going because whatever I do is going to set the table for them and for their world and their lives, and so it's my responsibility to keep plugging away and doing the best job that I can, and that's what I'm doing.
Speaking of responsibility and legacy, we're in an era in which Black history is being questioned and challenged and almost erased. Folks like yourself and Reverend Jesse Jackson, the founder of the Rainbow Push Coalition, loom large over American history. And what is your hope for younger generations in Chicago and across the state of Illinois to carry on the legacy of yourself and Reverend Jackson?
Well, I just hope that they understand, that young people understand that you can't give up. You have to keep struggling to go forward. You have to keep trying to move the arc of the moral universe towards justice. You have a responsibility to everybody else in your world to try to make things better. And I hope that's my legacy, is that it's not a burden. It is absolutely your responsibility and your duty to do what you can to make things better.
Senator Carol Moseley Braun, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
This is my pleasure.
That was Senator Carol Moseley Braun, the first Black woman U.S. Senator in America and the state of Illinois. This isn't the first time in history that brave women have pioneered and attempted to become president of the United States. In 1972, just a few years after civil rights legislation granted African Americans the right to vote, access to fair housing, and the freedom of movement in public space, Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to run for the presidency, and her candidacy sparked the movement of women seeking the highest office in the free world. Chisholm would work 14-hour campaign days and traveled on a Greyhound bus. She traveled the country to make her case, and her campaign was innate, developing new ways to reach all Americans.
I stand before you today as a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States of America. I am not the candidate of Black America, although I am Black and proud. I am not the candidate of the women's movement of this country, although I am a woman, and I'm equally proud of that. I am the candidate of the people of America.
Do you think that America is ready for a woman president?
I think America is more ready for a woman president than it has ever been before.
You've been in politics now for more than 20 years. Don't you ever get tired of fighting an uphill battle?
I hope eventually to be able to just sit back and guide a lot of beautiful young leaders in this country.
A generation of female leaders stand on the shoulders of VP Kamala Harris, Nikki Haley, Carly Fiorina, and Hillary Clinton. Coming up next is Reese Colbert. She's a best-selling author, the host of The Reese Colbert Show on SiriusXM, and she's a Democratic political strategist. Stay with us on Dialogue after this short break. From Illinois Soul, this is Dialogue. I'm Kennedy Vincent. Dialogue is an exchange about culture, straight from the soul. You can catch us on Saturday mornings at 11 and Tuesdays at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul. Now, joining the conversation is Reese Colbert. She's a best-selling author, the host of The Reese Colbert Show on SiriusXM, and she's a Democratic political strategist. Reese Colbert, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you for having me, Kennedy. It is an honor and a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you. There has been rampant mis- and disinformation directed towards Black people in this campaign cycle. These rebuttals have not been successful, and people still believe in the falsehoods. Why haven't the rebuttals broken through?
The fact of the matter is that Democrats have been completely asleep at the wheel in terms of the investment that is required and the infrastructure that is required to counter this disinformation. Disinformation has an infrastructure behind it, and it has a lot of various parties that are invested in it as well. I mean, I myself was the victim of a bot farm being created just to swarm my account in the 2020 election. And so it's not even just something that, oh, this is a Republican thing. This is foreign countries that are interfering in our elections. And so they have been relentless in investing in disinformation. And so unfortunately, what ends up happening is that they're invested in, they have an infrastructure, they have a network, and then the people that are countering that are just outgunned.
In the past, you've had confrontations with callers and guests on your show, including a male caller who recently had some really negative things to say towards VP Harris. How do you handle these types of interactions, as they most often attack Black women in politics?
Sometimes there's a way to gently correct people and push back. And then sometimes you just have to stomp a hole in people. And that was one of those cases where he called the vice president a hoe and said he's not voting for her. And so now I have to rain fire and fury on you. Now this is no longer going to be a civil clapback. This is going to be me ripping your head off. I do that more than probably on occasion, but I think what struck me after the fact is that there are two things that VP is always attacked on. It's not policy. It's her race, which is still a persistent narrative, and it's disinformation about that. But then the other thing is about her sexuality. You're not going to slut shame the vice president of the United States. But my whole point is that I'm happy at least that we did have a moment, at least in this campaign cycle, to be like, no, hell no. We're not doing this, policing women's bodies, policing somebody's sexual history, but being reduced to that, it was just so unconscionable to me. But it is a pattern of the disinformation and the narratives that they're driving about her.
We're now in the get out the vote aspect of the campaign. How do you motivate the unmotivatable? How do you reach them? Because some of these folks have felt this media fatigue, past election trauma, or they just don't even feel like things are going to get better for them.
Yeah. I understand that. I do. I got election fatigue, honey. I'm like, child, we don't ever get out of this election cycle ever. So I understand it. I understand it. I think it starts with listening to people. It starts with activating people who have credibility with those around them. And so I'm just gonna speak for myself personally. My tack is to try to arm people and empower people that then become the foot soldiers of activating those around them. Because people, whether you listen to me and you don't know who the hell I am or whatever, everybody got that smart cousin or that auntie or that uncle that be like, okay, cousin, uncle, aunt, mama, daddy, whoever, tell me how I'm supposed to vote. What am I supposed to know? Everybody has a person that they call up, and everybody has that person that's calling up other people and be like, y'all know you're supposed to vote. And so we want to arm those people. And hopefully we give them enough information so that they can listen to the concerns that people are expressing and then know how to reach them.
Pundits claim there's a realignment happening. Some say that the Democratic voter base will consist of women, while Republicans will skew more towards men. What's your take on that? What do you think about these possible solutions?
So I think when they're saying that, what they're really saying is that the Democratic Party is gaining more white women voters, and the Republican Party is gaining more white men voters because Black men are the second highest voting demographic in terms of the margins for Democrats. And so, and Black women are entirely Democrats. So there's no shift there. I think what they're saying is that there's a bigger, maybe more of a realignment in white voters. And I hope so, because that probably helps us. If I had to make an educated guess, I think that that's what, for instance, Hillary Clinton staked her campaign on. I think that's what Vice President Kamala Harris is staking her campaign on, is that what the Republican Party has done around abortion is going to be that red line that white women specifically, are going to shift on. So I'm hoping that maybe that's what does it, but I truly believe this is going to be more of a turnout and activating the base as opposed to a conversion election.
You have spoken directly to your followers and audience, controlling your narrative. And both the Trump and Harris campaigns have done that too. Trump speaking with Logan Paul, while Harris is appearing on the podcast Call Her Daddy. Does this mix continue now and in future campaigns? Because it feels like the traditional media's grasp on attention is diminishing.
Yeah. No, I agree. I've always been a fan of all of the above. I remember when people were only wanting to do MSNBC and CNN and stuff, and I'd be like, that's cool to do that, but you have to go on these other platforms. So I think that you need to do all of it. And I think that people need to do it all more frequently. People have sometimes, once a year or once a quarter or whatever. And it's like, it goes back to what I said about cumulative credibility. When people see you and they see you often, then the next time they see you, you're going to have more credibility to them. Now you're going to have less of a wall to have to break down, and you're going to have more of they're going to have more of a connection to you. And I still don't see the engagement with like Black media, for instance. And that's partly because you don't see even Black politicians going to these spaces.
Mm-hmm. Reese, you're known for telling it like it is. You're a Black woman in the public eye, and just recently, Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk were talking about a potential assassination of VP Kamala Harris. What are your thoughts on the safety of Black women in this political moment?
You know, the safety of Black women is never prioritized. I mean, Malcolm X said it how many decades ago? You know, the least protected woman is the Black woman. And so you can't operate strictly out of a sense of I need to, you know, I shouldn't say not operating out of a sense of I need to be safe, but there is going to be some discomfort and there's some risk that's involved. If you choose to say my safety comes first, completely understand. Nothing wrong with that. That does not mean that you're, you know, not fulfilling your purpose or you're not helping out our society. But there is a certain danger that comes in being a Black woman inherently. I mean, look at homicide rates, domestic violence, you name it. I don't want to be the Black trauma porn rundown. But I think it's a shame, though. The fact that it's baked into the cake doesn't make it any less unconscionable, and it's disgraceful. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because what do we ever do to anybody? What's the smoke for us for?
Hypothetically speaking, the election's over, President Harris will be sworn in, or President Donald Trump will reassume the mantle. Reese, in both scenarios, what is your hope for Black America after this election?
Yeah, I hope we're still free, that we're still citizens. That's my biggest hope. That's what's on the line for me. It truly is our citizenship. There are a lot of people don't even remember like pre-Obamacare when, you know, you could get kicked off for a pre-existing condition. And so the attention span and our memory is so short that a lot of people can't fathom like a Jim Crow type of society. They can't fathom some of the things that we're seeing. And I would dare say that there's a Jim Crow in terms of abortions, right? I mean, for women don't, I've been saying women don't have national citizenship anymore. Your bodily autonomy and your rights depend on what state you're in. And then if you leave that state, you can be hunted down from the state that you came from. That's not national citizenship. And so for Black people, I would like for us to still have that. There are already attacks on that with this whole immigrant push, right? And saying that cops can stop you and say, I don't think you're here illegally. So if you walk around with your papers, are you a citizen? You know, so that's my biggest fear about the outcome. And it might sound like it's a little conspiratorial and a little bit over the top, but I really worry about that. So that's my biggest hope, is that can we just be citizens still, and then we can figure out the rest after that.
Reese Colbert, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you, Kennedy.
That was Reese Colbert. She's a best-selling author, the host of The Reese Colbert Show on SiriusXM, and she's a Democratic political strategist. If you need information about the local, regional, and national candidates, check out ipmnewsroom.org and check out our Your Vote, Your Voice section. You can fill out a sample ballot before you go to the polls on November 5th. You can find the Dialogue podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And you can give us a follow on Instagram and Facebook at Illinois Soul. This episode of Dialogue was produced by Zainab Qureshi, Troy McDonald, and myself, Kennedy Vincent. Our News and Public Affairs Director is Reginald Hardwick, and production assistance by Steve Mork. Dialogue is a part of Illinois Soul and Illinois Public Media. Join us for our next dialogue every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. and Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on Illinois Soul FM 101.1 and WILL AM 580 Wednesdays at 8 p.m.